The promise: never sell your XRP. In the XRP community, one idea keeps coming back again and again, year after year. Never sell your XRP. Hold it. Believe in it. Wait for the payoff. But somewhere along the line, a new question emerges from long-term holders who are tired of just waiting. What if XRP could actually pay me without forcing me to sell? What if there was a way to generate income, to earn something tangible, while keeping every single coin intact? What if you could have it both ways, stay loyal to your conviction and get some return on capital in the meantime? It sounds perfect. Too perfect, maybe. And that's because the reality is significantly more complicated than the promise. In December 2025, the XRP ecosystem has expanded dramatically. New tools, new platforms, new ways to monetize your holdings are now available. But understanding what you're actually trading away to get that income is critical. Because in crypto, income doesn't materialize from nowhere. Someone always pays for it. The real question is, who, and at what cost to you? What does getting paid actually mean in crypto? Before diving into XRP-specific strategies, let's clarify something fundamental that most people get wrong. When someone says, earn income on your crypto, they don't mean free money. They don't mean the network spontaneously generating returns out of thin air. Income in crypto comes from exactly three sources, and only three. First, you're providing liquidity. Someone needs to trade, and you're offering them access to asset pairs. They pay fees for that access. Those fees flow to liquidity providers like you. Second, you're lending your assets. Someone else wants to borrow your XRP. They use it, and they pay you interest for that privilege. The borrowed XRP is gone from your control, but you're collecting interest on its use. Third, you're taking on exposure or risk. You're participating in a system where your assets are used in ways you don't fully control. You receive payment in exchange for accepting that risk. This is the trickiest category because the risk is often hidden or underestimated. In all three cases, someone else is paying you because they need access to capital, liquidity, or they need someone willing to take on risk they don't want to carry themselves. This is important. Income doesn't come from XRP, the network spontaneously deciding to reward you for loyalty. It comes from markets and people and businesses willing to pay for access to your assets or your risk. And that changes everything about how you should evaluate these opportunities. Why XRP is different from Ethereum. This is the critical foundation. XRP was never architected as a DeFi platform. Ethereum was designed from the ground up with smart contracts, programmable finance, and complex financial instruments in mind. Ethereum is essentially a global computer capable of running thousands of financial applications simultaneously. XRP, on the other hand, was designed with a singular focus: fast, reliable, low-cost payments. The XRP ledger is optimized for that. It's fast. It's cheap. It's proven. But it's not a blank canvas for building complex financial instruments. For years, this was a liability in the DeFi boom. While Ethereum exploded with yield farming, lending protocols, and complex derivatives, XRP holders had essentially no on-ledger way to earn meaningful income. You could hold XRP, but the ledger itself offered no staking, no yield, no financial instruments to monetize your holdings. That changed in 2024 to 2025 with the integration of the XRP ledger's native automated market maker, AMM, officially introduced as XLS 3.0. For the first time, XRPL had a built-in decentralized exchange and liquidity pool mechanism. This opened the door to legitimate income strategies operating directly on the ledger itself. But here's the catch: even with the AMM, XRPL remains fundamentally limited compared to Ethereum or Solana. The ecosystem is smaller. The DeFi tools are fewer. The risk vectors are different. And most importantly, the opportunities to earn are directly tied to liquidity and trading volume on the ledger, which, while growing, is still a fraction of what's available on major EVM chains. This limitation matters enormously when evaluating income strategies for XRP. It constrains your options. It limits your upside. And ironically, it sometimes forces you to leave the ledger entirely, bringing its own set of risks. The XRPL native path, liquidity pools and the AM. Let's start with the most straightforward way to earn income on XRP without leaving the ledger, providing liquidity to the XRP ledger's AMM. Here's how it works in practice in December 2025. You connect to the XRP ledger using a compatible wallet or interface. You deposit XRP into a liquidity pool, typically paired with another token. In return, you receive an LP token representing your share of that pool. As traders use the AMM to swap between assets in your pool, they pay a trading fee. That fee gets distributed proportionally to all liquidity providers in the pool. It sounds straightforward. Deposit capital, collect fees, wait. But the reality is far more complex. The fee structure on XRPL's AMM has evolved significantly through 2025. Initially, pools had fixed fee rates. But as of mid-2025, XRPL introduced enhanced fee mechanisms that allow liquidity providers to set fees at various tiers, potentially up to 2.5% per transaction. The idea is to give LPs more granular control over their risk-return trade-off. Why would you want higher fees? Because you need to be compensated for impermanent loss. This is where most people get into trouble, and where the true cost of earning without selling becomes apparent. The hidden tax, impermanent loss explained. Imagine you deposit 1,000 XRP and 1,000 USDC into an XRP/USDC liquidity pool when XRP is trading at $1. You have equal value on both sides. The pool has 1 million XRP and 1 million USDC. Now imagine XRP prices spike to $2. Suddenly, XRP is more valuable. The pool automatically rebalances to maintain equilibrium. To keep the constant product formula working, it ends up with fewer XRP and more USDC. So now your 1000 XRP has automatically been converted partially into more USDC. Let's say you now have 707 XRP and 1414 USDC. You still have equal value nominally, $1,414. But here's the problem: if you had simply held your original 1000 XRP and 1000 USDC, you would now have 2000 plus 1000 is equal to $3,000 worth of assets. By participating in the liquidity pool, you ended up with $2,828 worth. You've lost $172. That's impermanent loss. It's called impermanent because it only becomes permanent when you withdraw from the pool. If prices move back to where they started, it disappears. But in a volatile market, which XRP absolutely is, prices don't usually move back. They move sideways, creating constant rebalancing and constant losses. The trading fees you earn as a liquidity provider have to overcome these losses. If XRP is highly volatile, you might earn 5% in fees while losing 10% to impermanent loss. Net result, you're worse off than if you had simply held. This is the core of the trap. Platforms and yield-chasing content creators don't hide impermanent loss exactly. They just don't emphasize it. They show you the fee percentage and pretend that's what you'll earn. They don't show you detailed breakdowns of how often impermanent loss has exceeded fees in backtests. But in 2025, as XRPL's AMM has matured, this data is becoming clearer. Academic and community analyses show impermanent loss is not theoretical. It's a real, frequent, significant factor that can easily make holding the raw assets more profitable than providing liquidity. The interface layer, where XRPL liquidity gets practical. For most people, interacting with XRPL's raw AMM directly is technically challenging. You need to understand the ledger, how to construct transactions, how LP tokens work. It's not user-friendly. That's where interfaces come in. By December 2025, platforms like XP Market, Bifrost Wallet and others have made it much easier. You can point and click your way into a liquidity pool, view estimated yields, and manage your positions visually instead of through raw ledger operations. But here's the problem, these interfaces charge fees too. You're paying transaction fees to deposit, paying network fees to transact, paying withdrawal fees to extract your liquidity. These costs compound, especially if you're managing a small position or rebalancing frequently. The practicality improves by the month. But the fundamental math doesn't change, you're providing liquidity in a relatively small pool, compared to Uniswap or Curve, taking on impermanent loss, and earning fees that may or may not overcome that loss depending on market conditions. For most XRP holders, the honest assessment is, liquidity on XRPL can work as a small, managed experiment. It's not a guaranteed or set-and-forget income engine. The centralized path, exchanges and yield products. For someone just wanting to press a button and have XRP earn something, centralized platforms are far more appealing. As of late 2025, major exchanges and platforms run whole guides under titles like, How to Earn Passive Income with XRP, and XRP Staking Guide 2025. Bitrue, Binance, and others advertise XRP, earn, products, dual investments and structured products with advertised APYs from low single digits up to promotional double-digit campaigns. Here's what's actually happening. You send XRP to an exchange wallet. The exchange then lends that XRP to traders, market makers or institutions who want to borrow it. Those borrowers pay interest on the loan. The exchange takes a cut and passes the remainder to you. In some cases, exchanges use your XRP in their own trading strategies, cross-margin systems, or liquidity campaigns. You receive a percentage of the yield or fees. Bitrue, for example, has actively marketed using XRP as collateral for loans and structured products, explaining how users can lock XRP and borrow other assets or earn extra rewards. Some 2025 campaigns even advertise up to 80% APY on short-term promo vaults tied to XRP, which is a red flag for sustainability. The appeal is obvious, simplicity. You don't have to think about impermanent loss or bridges. You just deposit, and numbers go up. But the cost is equally obvious, you lose custody and control of your XRP. The custody problem and systemic risk. With centralized yield, the exchange effectively owns your XRP while it's deposited. They have the keys. They control whether you can withdraw. They determine what to do with your assets. You have no on-chain way to verify the exchange is actually solvent or conservatively managed. This is not paranoia. The last cycle taught this the hard way. Celsius, Voyager, BlockFi, and others collapsed, freezing user assets and wiping out safe yield products. In each case, underlying coins like BTC or XRP didn't fail. Platforms did. In 2025, risks remain very real. Platforms can invest customer deposits in risky DeFi strategies. They can over-leverage and suffer cascading liquidations. They can be hacked, losing funds from hot wallets. They can face regulatory action, freezing withdrawals in whole regions. When any of these happen, customer deposits are at risk. You don't just lose the yield. You potentially lose the entire principal. For some people, especially with smaller allocations, this risk might feel acceptable for, say, 4 to 6% APY on a major CX. For others, it's completely unacceptable. The important thing is that you consciously decide, rather than assuming big brand equals no risk. The wrapped path, leaving XRPL for DeFi yields. The third major avenue for XRP income is the most complex, wrapping your XRP on other blockchains and deploying it into DeFi protocols. By December 2025 this has become a serious path. Hex Trust and other custodians have launched wrapped XRP variants, often called wXRP, across multiple chains, including Ethereum, Solana, Optimism and HyperEVM, with around $100 million of initial liquidity backing some of these initiatives. The idea is simple. Custodian locks your native XRP. Issues you a one wrapped token on another chain. You then use that wrapped token in that chain's DeFi ecosystem. Once you have wXRP on Ethereum, for example, you can deposit it into lending protocols like Aave or Compound to earn interest. Provide liquidity on DEXs like Uniswap. Participate in yield farming, bribe systems, or points campaigns. Use it as collateral to borrow stablecoins and loop yields. The upside, DeFi yields on major chains can be higher and more diverse than anything XRPL alone currently offers. The downside, you've now added multiple entirely new failure points. The bridge risk, your biggest vulnerability. When you wrap XRP and send it across a bridge, you are trusting the bridge implementation not to have exploitable bugs. The custodian not to mismanage, rehypothecate or lose locked XRP. The signing/multisig setup not to be compromised. The destination chain security model to hold up. In 2024 to 2025, cross-chain exploits and bridge hacks remain the largest single category of DeFi losses. Analysts repeatedly show that a disproportionate share of total hacked value came from bridges and cross-chain mechanisms, not from core L1 chains. If a bridge used for wXRP is hacked or misconfigured, your wrapped coins can become worthless overnight, even if the XRPL itself remains perfectly secure. Hex Trust's design, for instance, improves some aspects via institutional custody and OFT-compatible standards, but it still concentrates a large amount of value under one operational setup. That makes it an attractive target. On top of that, as multiple wrapping solutions and cross-chain standards appear, wXRP, EXRP, cbXRP, etc., liquidity and trust fragment. Some wrappers might trade at discounts in stress conditions, or temporarily depeg if redemption capacity is constrained. The smart contract risk. Beyond bridges, the DeFi protocols themselves carry risk. When you deploy wXRP into a protocol, you assume the core contracts are bug-free. You assume there's no undiscovered economic exploit. You assume governance can't rug or heavily dilute you. Yet 2025 still sees periodic protocol exploits and economic attacks across multiple chains. Audits reduce risk, but they don't remove it. Attackers only need one unrecognized weakness. For you, this means yields described as passive are in fact compensation for lending your assets to code you don't control, on chains you don't secure, behind bridges you don't manage. The leverage and liquidation risk. Some of the highest XRP-related yields come from looped positions. Deposit wXRP as collateral. Borrow stable coins. Farm with them. Possibly recollateralize and repeat. This can turn a 6 to 8% base yield into double digits. But it introduces liquidation price risk. If XRP drops sharply and collateral ratios are breached, protocols will liquidate positions to stay solvent. When that happens, you can lose your wXRP collateral plus any extra margin you posted, all while thinking you were running a passive income strategy. The borrowing interfaces clearly show collateral ratios and health factors, but most users focus on APY numbers instead of liquidation scenarios. This is how safe yield becomes forced selling at the worst possible moment. The psychology trap: why people chase income they don't need. XRP holders have had a uniquely long emotional journey: SEC cases, delistings, underperformance relative to BTC and ETH, narratives about the chosen one coin, and regulatory clarity coming soon. Years of waiting create psychological pressure. Feeling behind versus other coins. Regret over not rotating into better performing assets. Desire to justify staying in the trade. Income strategies seem like the perfect antidote. You're still never selling. You're making your XRP work. You can screenshot APY numbers and feel validated. But frequently, the yield becomes the new anchor for conviction. Instead of, I hold XRP because I believe in its long-term role, it becomes, I hold XRP because it pays me X%. Once that shift happens, if yield dries up or a strategy fails, conviction evaporates and panic follows. The compounding problem: return on what? Consider this scenario. You hold 10,000 XRP at $2 equals $20,000. You join a 5% yield program for 1 year. You end the year with 10,500 XRP. If by then XRP has dropped to $1, your stack is worth $10,500. If you had simply held XRP without the yield strategy, you'd have 10,000 XRP at $1 equals $10,000. So relative to pure holding, you're up $500, nice, but small compared to the $10,000 drawdown. If instead XRP doubled to $4, your yield matters even less. 10,000 XRP $40,000 versus 10,500 XRP $42,000. Price movement dominates the outcome. Yield is minor compared to adoption and macro trend. In a hypervolatile market, price path and thesis are usually more important than squeezing a few additional % of income. The custody spectrum: what you're really trading. Think of strategies along a spectrum. Self-custody, hold only. You control keys. Risk, XRP price only. XRPL AMM liquidity. You keep custody but let a protocol rebalance your assets continuously. Risks, impermanent loss, protocol bugs, UX mistakes. CX yield/loans. You give up custody to an institution. Risks, insolvency, hacks, regulations, terms changes. wXRP plus DeFi. You give up custody and route risk through bridges and smart contracts. Risks, bridge hack, contract exploit, or liquidation. Each step to the right increases complexity and potential yield, but also adds new, non-price ways to lose capital. The more layers you stack, the more you rely on everything working correctly across independent systems. History suggests that in crypto, eventually something somewhere breaks.